Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Wollmann. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia Jr., and with me, as always, is the animal lover that is Jennifer Wollmann. Jennifer, say hi.
Hi, everybody.
So, of course, this is always the kinds of episodes that we really look forward to, and it is when we have an amazing guest. And so, Jennifer, would you do the honors and introduce Lindsey to all of us and our audience?
Sure. And I was going to say this is the horse episode, which, if you can't see me, but I have a horse necklace and there's a beautiful horse behind, not a real horse, a horse portrait behind Lindsey, our guest today. But let's just jump right in. So if you are involved in real estate or just interested in retail real estate in specific, I think you're really going to enjoy this episode today. And you're going to leave with a ton of great insights about what we call the fun asset class and tenant representation, especially. Yeah. And I am a huge, huge fan of our guest today. Our guest today is Lindsey Barden. And Lindsey is the principal broker and co-founder of Dark Horse CRE, hence the horse. And Dark Horse CRE is a boutique firm in retail brokerage in Knoxville in East Tennessee, and they specialize in tenant rep and user, which we'll get into in a little bit. So we're going to talk about niches, we're going to talk about horses, we're going to talk about retail. So let's just dive right in, Lindsey. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I'm so excited when you said yes. I'm like, she doesn't know me other than the comments on Instagram. I'm constantly posting.
I'm down for it. Anything on social media. Y'all are all my friends.
Yeah, you're amazing on social. So let's get started with you telling us a little bit about yourself outside of CRE. Where did you grow up? What kind of kid were you? What were your hobbies, your interests, etc.?
Sure. Nobody really asked me what I was like as a kid. So I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. I obviously grew up with horses. But I was a competitive figure skater growing up. I also was a dancer, so did a little bit of competition in dance, but from elementary school all the way through high school and parts of college, I was a competitive figure skater. So I traveled up and down the East Coast competing in competitions. And that was actually my first job as a teenager, was teaching ice skating lessons. So I feel fortunate I didn't have to scoop popcorn at the movie theater, but and it taught me a lot about time management, because I had to create my own schedule and sort of monitor my skaters' progress. So I was just a very competitive kid growing up. So it led right into real estate as a broker for sure.
Great. And now you moved to Knoxville. You live in Knoxville. So tell us what brought on that move and what made you form your own brokerage.
So I actually had my own brokerage in the Virginia market. I covered Central Virginia all the way from the Roanoke area to Hampton Roads, everything south of Fredericksburg. I opened Dark Horse in 2017. And in 2023, my husband and I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, just looking for a different lifestyle. And all of my family is from Knoxville. So I grew up coming here for every SEC football season and holidays, and my husband loved it. And so we decided to make the move in 2023. So I was very familiar with the market. It has changed a lot since I was a kid. And just decided to really hone in. I was already focusing mostly on tenant representation. But when I expanded into East Tennessee, just solely focused on tenant representation here. And I cover Knoxville down to Chattanooga and the Tri-Cities area in East Tennessee. So anything that's in Nashville or Memphis, I usually refer out to other companies and brokers.
Now I understand how you were able to get such a deep understanding of the market in a short period of time. Like, how can someone become such an expert basically on an area in 2.5 years in commercial real estate, right? So now I understand the fact that you'd been traveling there, you kind of knew the market. You were probably like Fernando and I, wherever we travel, we always seem to be looking at zoning and
Yes,
being like, oh, that is a great zoning. Look at that. That's, textbook zoning. So you probably were already looking at Tennessee and during your visits at Knoxville and stuff.
With that. When I would come for football games or any visit, I would see some cool concept and I would be like, oh, we need that in Virginia, or sort of figure out what the new development was happening. I'm just like you guys where you travel. I recently traveled to Tulsa, Oklahoma with a girlfriend, and she was like, are you going to keep taking pictures of random buildings? I'm like, yes, they look really cool here in this like downtown area. We need this in this area of East Tennessee. So yes, I'm right there with you.
That's awesome. So in commercial real estate, everybody, as soon as you get in, they're like, you have to pick a niche, right? Like everyone puts that into your head. So your niche is really on the user side of retail, right? You do mostly tenant rep, but you also do buyer rep, et cetera. Can you tell us a little bit about how you decided what you were going to focus on when you first got started? Were you generalist? Were you in a totally different asset class, et cetera? And then we can get into some of the specifics of how to choose your niche and what being a tenant rep in retail is.
Sure. So in college, I was a real estate major, and I was fortunate to have an advisor that introduced me for my internship, a retail developer. So I interned with a retail developer for a period of time before I graduated. Really fell in love with the retail component of real estate. However, the development side was a little bit slow in terms of being married to one project for 2 years and not really working on anything else. They saw that, and fortunately, they had some really great connections with larger brokerage firms and introduced me to a local C&W office in Central Virginia. And I was with them for about 7 years. I just focused on the retail side, but did landlord and tenant representation. But through the time with them, really gravitated towards the tenant side of the business. At one point I had 30 listings and, 10 or 12 tenants that I was running with, but the tenant side really grew in my business. And I really gravitated towards, that relationship building of doing not just one location with one individual, doing, 5, 10 rollout stores in a market. So as I opened up my own shop, that continued to grow. I also work with developers of those users, buying pad sites or larger parcels and helping that development side. So I really sort of just gravitated towards the tenant representation and developer representation in the market. I will say that I always felt like I was negotiating twice, which was my biggest thing on the landlord side. I felt like I was negotiating with the landlords to convince them what the market was like, and then negotiating with the tenant themselves. So I felt like I was part of a team on the tenant side.
That is so interesting. So let's back up a second because I have so many questions. But the first one is, one of the things that we always talk about commercial real estate is, there's no two deals are ever the same, right? There's so much, and as a, if you're looking at it as a box of toys, there's so many things or so many different things that to play with. You have all these different asset classes. So first, why retail? What is it that you like about retail just overall?
I feel like I know retail, as a shopper and understanding sort of how they merchandise products. When I was in college, I came home between my sophomore and junior year, and there was an entire area of a retail corridor that had once been cow pastures. And then there was a massive Target development that was underway. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. I would kind of be into why that was developed there. And just, I've always sort of watched people and how they navigate areas and shopping malls and retail centers, and been really curious about why they make decisions that they do. So I just feel like I understood it. Whereas like the office side, I felt like, okay, it needs to be 20 minutes from their home. Or the industrial side, It needs the right size doors. And I just felt like there were so many different components to the retail. I was never going to get bored.
For sure.
And, I just understood that from being such a watcher, the retail component and why things made sense, why a McDonald's wanted this corner, why Ulta wants to be next to these tenants, co-tenancy wise. It just makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's really the place where people interact the most with commercial real estate is all the retail that is around us. Your interaction with logistics and office, you have a different relationship with those places than you do with retail. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's interesting, you mentioned before, but we always talk to our agents that the thing about our business is that we have 2 points of sale. First, you got to convince the person that you're helping that you're the right person for the job. Then you have to do the job, right? And, you have to bring it home. And I really like that idea of you mentioning, well, I had to negotiate with 2 people, but when I'm a tenant rep, I feel like I'm part of a team. So speak a little bit on that, because I think that's a really interesting way to cement, okay, this is kind of where I want to build my business and where I want to play. But within that, this is the kind of thing that I'm really more eager to do.
Yeah, sure. So, when I was doing landlord work, I would have landlords that maybe had a Class B shopping center, but they were in love with Starbucks and they wanted a Starbucks, and Starbucks wasn't going to go there. And just convincing them of that was difficult for me. When I get a tenant that I work with, I try to dig in and really understand who their clients are, what drives their sales, what type of submarket is really going to be beneficial for them to enter the market for location number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that they're not going in a secondary market and not getting that wow factor entering into, let's say, Knoxville or Chattanooga, to really create that momentum. And so I spend a lot of time understanding, their concept as a whole. And then when I go into the market, I really study what, the public is doing to find out where those people are. And by creating that atmosphere in my business model, I feel like I'm part of their team. I'm invested in their business. I want them to be successful. When they sign franchise deals that are, 3-5 unit deals, I want them to do all of them. I want that first location to be such a success that they can continue building quickly, and get to that number of units that they allocated.
I love that, because This is very eye-opening to me because I always thought that it was the landlord that would curate the shopping center. But I what I hear from you is almost like you're curating that for the tenant to say, go here, not there, because of all the other conditions. So all the things that a landlord would consider, you're asking them to consider as a tenant.
Yes.
And I think that's so impactful.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's not necessarily the landlords who are creating traffic patterns and why people like a certain shopping center over another unless it's driven by specifically co-tenancy. If a tenant next to the building has failed over and over and over again, it just gives it this flavor that, the public starts saying, okay, this one's going to go in. How long is this one going to last? And
so true.
You need that sort of understanding when you're working with these tenants and retailers to shape sort of their development plan.
So it sounds to me like you work more with, do you see yourself working more with franchises, or do you do a lot of small businesses? Because I know putting a small business, especially a first-time small business, into a space is harder. Can you talk about which one you do more of, and also the differences between working with a first-time business opening their first location versus one that's either expanding or part of a franchise?
Sure. So when I started in the business, I worked with a lot of like local mom and pops, one location, one off. And as I've continued to grow my business, now I almost exclusively work with multi-unit operators. Now, some of those operators are first-time franchisees for the brand, but they're not first-time business owners typically. But they need sort of that initial understanding of the market and how the brand operates. So the majority of the operators that I'm working with are franchise driven, or it's a corporate company where they're all corporate owned stores. Unless I'm working with, again, a developer who has a relationship with a retailer or sourcing sites for that retailer, and the retailer might own them all, or they might be then sending a franchisee to each location. But again, most of what I do now is a multi-rollout. So they're new to the East Tennessee market, or they're just entering and have done maybe one or two locations, and they need more of a plan overall to where do we go next? What submarket is most important for us to enter into now? And what's the plan in 5 and 8 years for our rollout locations?
So did your business naturally kind of move in that progression, right, from the small individual mom and pop into these multi-unit stores? Or was that a conscious decision on your part that you said, I'm going to focus on these tenants?
It was more of a conscious, I wanted to build relationships long-term with my clients. And when I started working with some of these franchisees and we were looking at multiple units at the same time, or multiple locations at the same time, I understood that we were creating more of that team atmosphere. We were working as a team to develop something over a period of 3 to 5 years. And I really liked that aspect of having a client long-term, not just getting to the lease and saying, okay, it's signed, bye, I'm out. But really being part of their process and their growth plan, and their success in the market.
Did any of your individual first-time small business owners, when you first started leasing to, retail leasing in Knoxville, did any of them end up expanding and becoming one of those multi-location tenants, or for the most part, did they stay single operator?
I will say that not in Knoxville yet, because I've only been here for 2.5, 3 years. In Virginia, yes, but more so when they purchased, let's say, one unit of a franchise concept. And then they were successful at that one location and then decided to buy a 3-unit package and open 3 more units. I haven't really worked with anybody yet that has opened a sort of off the cuff concept and then went and tried to franchise it at a later date. That the franchise laws in Virginia are a little bit challenging, so I can see that happening here in East Tennessee more than I could in Virginia.
And since it was a conscious decision to move in that direction, how did you go about doing that? I mean, franchisees tend to be part, obviously the franchisor is huge. A lot of times they have their own in-house real estate team. How did you become that person, or how did you navigate being a franchisee rep for a larger chain?
Sure. Well, my cold calling changed for one. I was calling mom and pops to try to represent them who are existing in the market, who either needed, to open that second location, or I was trying to get them to open a second location. My networking went to more ICSCs and retail lives where you're just coming in contact with those multi-unit operators. And just developing my knowledge of the market and as a whole, understanding where franchisees or where retailers should be placing multiple units, making sure that they're far enough apart and they're capturing different submarkets, what a rollout plan looks like. So understanding that aspect is a little bit different than somebody who just knows one corridor very, very, very well, or they just specialize in one area of the market. I typically cover a much larger area than most brokers. Most brokers will just focus on Knoxville, or they'll just focus on Chattanooga. But these franchisees typically sign on for a much larger territory to make sure that they have the opportunities to do multi-units. So making sure I knew the market in order for those rollout plans to be successful when I'm going to pitch myself to these retailers was really important in changing that, concept of my business.
You probably have great instincts. I'm sure that you can walk into or tour a site and instantly know if this is going to be a fit or not a fit. But it sounds to me like you have been very data driven in your understanding of the marketplace. We try to kind of demystify commercial real estate here. So I guess the way I would like to phrase this question is there a data point that you feel it's maybe overestimated, overutilized, that maybe it doesn't really move the needle? And is there a data point that you feel is, kind of like, pardon the pun, like a dark horse of really understanding, hey, this is really how you decide whether to pull the trigger or not, and that, that most people ignore?
I won't say that there's a data point that really pulls the trigger for everybody, because I think every concept is different and everybody's client is different, or customer is different. I will say that there's a gap between local knowledge and sometimes what the corporate retailer sees. They want to see, a certain number of people in a 3-mile radius ring, or they want to understand what the 10-minute drive time is. And sometimes that becomes a hurdle when coming into a market, and not understanding traffic patterns, growth patterns. A 3-mile radius ring in Knoxville is going to be completely different than a 3-mile radius ring in Nashville. Yeah. And the rent in Knoxville is going to be much lower than it is in Nashville. So your sales might be comparable, but when you're looking at actual data on a demographic sheet, it might not check that box at the population level that you want, but it trades so differently. So it's really important for me to get clients actually in my car, drive them through these centers and show them, there's your client, there's the mom in the yoga pants that's buying the coffee, and she's got to pick her kids up, so she's going to come back through this drive-through before she heads home. Is your client, the business owner that needs a quick lunch? understanding like that AM and PM traffic, which you can't see. There's no data that really shows that to the exact. You've got to live and breathe and be in those shopping centers. So I always think it's important to not necessarily ignore the data, but take it with a grain of salt, the actual data points, and get them in the car and have them look at where their clients and customers are shopping.
That's so true. And it's funny that you mentioned Tulsa, Oklahoma, because I spent a week in Tulsa a lifetime ago. And I remember that we would traverse very long distances, but it was a very short drive time just because it was a wide open road. So it was a very different experience than you are in a highly dense city. So to your point, that totally shifts the pattern. You can't apply the same expectation from market to market because it's so diverse.
Right, absolutely. And understanding where the growth is going. I mean, you need a local resource to tell you that. When a traffic pattern is about to change because there's 2 anchor stores that are going east instead of west, and knowing that pre-development, whether TDOT or VDOT is going to make a major road improvement that's going to adjust some of the shopping patterns. Just looking at a 10-minute drive time or a 3-mile population. The population with the radius rings is a big one for me too, because when you're looking at an actual site, many times the retail corridor is impacting the population, because in that 1-mile ring, you're not getting a lot of population because it's all big box stores and it's the retail corridor itself. So you really need to go out further to get the actual population that is trading that corridor or market.
And I think you did a great post on street cuts and curb cuts and how, and I think those are data points that, like a lot of the franchise documents that I've looked at, they don't really talk about that. They're not looking at that. So if they're looking at specific data points, they might be focusing on the center that, to your point in that post, if that cut changes, then everything changes. Can you talk a little bit and expand? Do you know which post I'm talking?
I think so. It was probably, how when you're looking at a site, if you have a median cut that certainly appears and you are getting all of these left-hand turns, or you're getting your drive-through jammed up because now your access has changed, that can completely adjust your model. And how many people you can get through your, drive-through in a certain amount of time. So when you look at a site and it seems perfect today, but it's in maybe a greener area, or, there's future development plans, you have to think about, is this site still going to work if they throw a median in the middle of that road and no one can take a left? They got to U-turn around. And where are they going to have to U-turn around? Is the next light, a half a mile up, and my competitor, they're going to hit before I get there? So just thinking long-term, because, these leases are 10, 15-year deals. Right. So just making sure that you're checking all those boxes now when you're doing the deal, so you're not in a jam in 5 years when population has, especially in East Tennessee or in Tennessee as a whole, we've just got, so much influx that is that going to change?
What is the reputation of Knoxville? Is it more of a college town, or has that shifted, grown? How do you're speaking about growth, so I think it's a good segue into what do you envision to be the future of Knoxville?
Sure. I would say that we used to be sort of, the UT college town, or known as that. We weren't. And for a long time, we were kind of the redheaded stepsister to Nashville. We weren't as exciting, and we didn't have Broadway and all the music, and just not as much growth. But we're really getting attention because, the cost of living is lower here in Knoxville. You're getting a ton of institutional landlords that are now looking at the market. You have a lot of new businesses that are coming and relocating because it's less expensive for them to move their business here in East Tennessee or Knoxville versus Nashville, especially for their employees, if they have to move their employees for, housing costs or whatnot. So, our reputation is definitely on the up, and getting a lot of action from the retailers as well. If I could just come up with more space, that would be great. we have a very, very tight market here. So
has Morgan Wallen opened a bar in Knoxville already?
Not yet, but we have a massive development underway that will sit right next to the university on the river, and it'll have 100,000 square feet of entertainment and restaurant space.
Wow.
So I can imagine there will be some component of that will be, some music bar or
tell Kenny
facility.
Chesney to, fly back to and just, settle in the river. Come on.
Right. They sell out those Neyland Stadium concerts, so why not?
Yeah, exactly.
On the tenant rep side, since you do so much work beforehand, I mean, like just talking about how you tour them around, showing them not the spaces, but the community, the center, the nuances of each one. Do you do tenant exclusives? Do you have your all clients sign an exclusive?
No, I don't think I have ever had a tenant sign an exclusive with me. I develop a relationship with them and become part of their team. But if there's ever a time that they feel like they want to leave or, work with somebody else, or I feel that I'm not the right fit, and I've certainly had occasions where I have, I'm not the best fit for this type of concept or your strategy. Sometimes if I feel like it's just going sideways, I will take a step back and say, I think you need to work with somebody else. So I do not sign exclusives. I want to be part of their team and all of us moving in the same direction. And a lot of my clients are not local. A good majority I'm picking up at the airport. We're doing an entire day tour. Maybe they're spending the night. We're doing another day tour, and then I'm dropping them back off at the airport. So they're not local. They're using me as their sole resource here in East Tennessee.
So do you get those types of clients? You said your cold calling change. Are you calling the franchisor and saying, hey, I heard you're expanding in East Tennessee or Knoxville? Can you kind of walk us through how you get those clients, and then how ICSC, because it's funny, this month's theme is building the American dream. And that's why, we figured tenant rep is small business owners, et cetera. But next month's theme is community building. And I think you're the perfect one to end July and go into August, because you're on that cusp, right? So how do you call and speak directly to franchisors to get the clients, and then they send the franchisees to you, or?
Typically, yes.
Okay.
I will say that a lot of my business comes from referrals from past clients or past retailers that I've worked with, or retail directors that are in-house within corporate. And then they've jumped ship or moved to another retail concept, and they'll pick up the phone and say, hey, Lindsey, you helped me open, 10 units in this market previously. I'm now working for whatever it is. And they'll use me as their local resource again. When I do pick up the phone, it is directly to the franchisor or the corporate company. And most of the time they're not here. It's a new concept I've heard of that's, coming out of California or Texas. And I think it would be a great fit for Knoxville or East Tennessee. And, I'm pitching them constantly before they even decide on Tennessee. Typically, we're not there yet. We haven't decided, and I'm continually following up because I know that they'll be successful here. So that when they do have a franchisee for the market, or they do decide to expand here, they have a resource already. So I offer, if you ever are interested in the market, happy to jump on the phone, walk you through an aerial. Whatever it is, to help you understand if you feel like it would be a fit for expansion.
So, and you mentioned Tulsa that you were always, when you were there, you were taking pictures of stuff. Do you go to other markets and see a concept and be like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking of Salty Donut. Salty Donut, they opened in Nashville, but I'm thinking of how they started in Wynwood and then they started expanding. So do you ever go to a place like Miami and say, oh my gosh, I would love to have this. They would be such a good fit. And then just call the owner or the franchisor?
I do. Absolutely. I went to High Point, I guess it was earlier this year, and ran across a concept and thought, oh, that would be really great here. So I picked up the phone, figured out who the contact was, found their master broker, made the connection, because I knew that they would be a good fit. They are not ready to expand now, but yes, it was just driving to High that, where I saw the concept. Anytime I travel, I'm looking around. If something looks like it's not a one, location shop, or maybe it potentially would be a franchise driven concept, I'm picking on the phone and introducing myself, just finding out about the concept, Googling everything I can about how many locations they have and where they are and what their expansion track has looked like.
I have to apologize, Lindsey, because my partner, we told you, we just moved into a new office and we actually have a salty donut downstairs.
Do
and
you?
I kept thinking, and we haven't visited yet,
breakfast.
and we haven't had breakfast. And
now you didn't hear anything but donuts.
Yeah, all I could think of was right after this recording, we're going downstairs to get a donut. So
now you know why I love retail. I can always, he's like, you always talk about food. I'm like, well, food is part of retail. It's one of the F's.
When I'm walking into these shopping centers, I'm shopping. I'm walking in. That's where I get a lot of my data too. I'm spending time in the boutique stores or the restaurants, and I'm asking the employees questions, how's business? Are there heavier days? How do you like your landlord? That's a great one. I love that scoop. Just getting those data points from the existing tenants is ideal.
And do you just to kind of piggyback on your relationship building with franchisors, do you also attend any franchise conferences, or are there any that are worth your time?
I have not attended specific franchise conferences. I would love to. They just have thus far backed right up next to an ICSC or a Retail Live. So it's on my list for next year. But there's the IFA, which is I think the International Franchise Association. They have a couple scattered throughout the year that I would love to attend. But really right now it's where the retailers are at, ICSC and Retail Live locations or conferences.
Tell us a little bit about ICSC, which ones you go to, how you work the conference, et cetera. And same thing with Retail Live.
Sure.
A little bit different. They both deal with retail, but they're set up different.
They are. So I leave my conferences for future clients and prospecting. I typically don't go to an ICSC or a Retail Live and meet with existing clients to review deals. I feel like technology has come far enough along that we're on Zooms every week, or, I can easily contact them and we can push these deals forward. If I need them to be in front of a landlord face-to-face, I feel like the Zoom or Teams calls do that now. So when I'm going to an ICSC or a Retail Live, I am just trying to make connections with retailers that aren't here yet, and trying to understand, would they be a good fit, trying to understand their expansion models. When I go into the conferences, I'll scan the attendee list ahead of time and sort of make a short list of who I definitely want to see and network with. But I try not to pigeonhole myself too much with meetings. ICSC Vegas is the hardest to do that, just because everyone has, for so many years just booked their schedule. So it's hard not to, if you want to meet with somebody, not go ahead and schedule a meeting up advance. Retail Live is very different, where it's more casual. You can hit 40 retailers in 4 hours and get all the information that you need without setting any meetings at all. But I'm using those conferences as prospecting tools for Knoxville and my own business. Because even if they're not going to work with me, I need to know if we are on their radar.
Yeah.
And so both ICSC and Retail Live have multiple conferences. I know you said you go to ICSC Vegas. What feeder markets do you go to in terms of ICSC and Retail Live? Do you try to go to all of them? Do you alternate every year with, okay, this year I'm going to do Vegas and New York and Florida, but I'm not going to do some of the other? How do you figure out which ones you're going to go to?
So I've always gone to Vegas. I think this past year was my 18th Vegas. And I typically go to New York. I haven't the last couple years. That ICSC has transitioned, in my opinion. There are fewer actual retailers there, and it's more institutional landlord heavy. So when I was going, the landlords were trying to schedule meetings with me to talk about my tenants in their shopping centers, which I felt wasn't a beneficial use of my time. They could pick up the phone and call me in my office in Knoxville. For ICSC, I'll consider going to Charlotte, and I'll consider going to Atlanta because that's where the retail reps that would cover Tennessee will be. But outside of that, I typically always go to Vegas. And then for Retail Live, I go to Nashville as well as the one that is in Florida. When you get outside of the Southeast or within, too far away from your home state, the retail reps that attend those conferences, if it's more of a regional or local conference, they're not going to be the same retail rep that covers your state. So there's a disconnect in that personal introduction at the show, which is what I'm going for. So they can see me in person and have a conversation, and we can talk about the market.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Because I know people work conferences differently and have different reasons for going. So thank you for sharing that. You are, I've got to say, one of my favorite Instagram, Dark Horse CRE is one of my favorite Instagram accounts to follow. Because
I appreciate that.
You and everybody needs to follow Lindsey. It's Dark Horse CRE on Instagram. I don't want to use the word authentic because I feel like that word has been so overused. So I'm going to use one of your own self-describable words, which is crunchy. And just the amount of information, how you portray it. I'm assuming you probably do use some AI for your postings, but you can't tell that you're using AI. So you've obviously done a really good job of making sure the content is yours, the voice is yours. And you're one of the few people in CRE on Instagram, in my opinion, that really is like the whole package, right? You show your personal, I love the one I'm telling you, my stalkerdom is going to show here. The U-Haul one with you and your husband, that was hilarious.
Yes.
Following you in your horseback riding. So tell me a little bit about Instagram, when you started, how you started, how you can be you, right? Because for me, it's uncomfortable to be me on Insta, right? I'm always trying to be the professional, but you are so crunchy. So,
well, thank you. I feel like in order to be successful with my clients, it's best if they know what they're getting into. So if I can show them my personality and what's important to me and the good, bad, and ugly, I'm kind of a no filter person anyways. I feel like showing that on Instagram and LinkedIn is important because if they're going to do business with me, I want them to know, what's important to me. Because if it doesn't look like it's a good match just by following me on Instagram or, some of my posts, we probably aren't going to work well together. I'm very sarcastic and I try to find humor in things. But I also am very opinionated and, will share the good, bad, and ugly about anything. So I'm not going to just tell you, why it's great and why we should do this site. And, it checks these boxes. I'm going to tell you why it doesn't too. And I feel like by sharing my personality through social media, the clients that gravitate towards that or the people that gravitate towards that are going to we're going to work really well together and be a really good team. So I try not to be so professional that it's just cut and dry. And when you meet me that, this person is totally different than, they're living in my car for 12 hours when I pick them up from the airport. So I hope that they get a little piece of me before they jump in my car. So,
and you obviously clean out your car, which is your office and command center before you pick them up, because I've heard some of your car stories too.
Well, I do. I got to make sure the saddle pads out so they're not smelling horse the whole time.
Well, I mean, it's called the fun asset class for a reason. There's got to be some fun in there. So,
exactly. We like trying out new restaurants and, just having fun with it.
Absolutely.
Because, that's what gravitates their customers too. If their concept's not fun and, ever evolving, if, it's not exciting, people are going to shop there.
So I have a selfish question to ask. So my wife and I, we have 2 daughters, and for 10 years, we traveled all around the country because they were both competitive cheerleaders. And you were a competitive ice skater for a big part of your life. I wonder what lessons you took from that experience that you can correlate to your success, not only in business, but in life, just overall, how that helped shape you.
Sure. I will say I'm not good at taking a no because of my competitive skating. When you're learning a new technique or a new jump or adding a rotation to something, you're going to fall a million times. So I'm okay with failure. I have a hard time with opportunity loss versus because I didn't take the chance versus, getting the no. That doesn't bother me. So I feel like, when I entered into real estate 20 years ago and I was, picking up the phone, doing the old school cold calling, like the no's did not bother me, or going up to some random person and asking for data. It just, I'm used to having to fall before I get that answer. So just that sort of workhorse of getting to the finish line or the bottom line of, whatever I'm seeking definitely came from skating. Persistence, I guess you could say.
So it's so funny. I love these interviews and the fact that Fernando and I don't, because that was in the back of my mind, his question. Like sometimes we're in each other's brains, but mine was more because you mentioned that figure skating also helped with time management and everything else. Mine, because of my love of horses, was on the horse side. And so within competitive skating, I imagine that's you being competitive, not only with other skaters, but with yourself. But with horsemanship, it's not a competition between you and the horse, right? So tell me, similar question to Fernando's, what does horseback riding and bring to your state of mind? And then 2, how does the lessons that you learn riding and becoming one kind of with the horse transfer to what you do in retail real estate?
Well, it's definitely very different. I felt like when I was a figure skater, everything was in my control. Whether I landed that jump, it was whether I tried enough in practice and, did it enough to make sure that it was landed and accurate when I was in competition. What riding horses has taught me is that you can't control everything. You're your partner and the other person on the deal or the landlord, when you're riding a horse, you're working with somebody else, one that doesn't communicate the same way you do and has a mind of its own, that you can't always control. So understanding, nothing is in my control really, even though I think I can control, many aspects. So that's really what I pull from the horses is, understanding that not everything is in my control. Ride through the messy, which was something that I learned recently, just continuing to push through the ugly to get to the finish line. And, when I'm in the saddle, I can only think about riding. I can't think about anything else. I recently hit the dirt in a lesson. So I'm just trying to stay on and, progress with my partner, which is my horse. And, getting some momentum and progressing and, whatever we're trying to do. But I can only think about what I'm like riding. I can't think about work. I can't think, when you're driving down the road, you've got a million things going on. And, when I'm in the gym, I can think about work and I can answer emails. But when I'm riding, that's not the case.
I wish I'd interviewed you way before I took my last horrific fall, because I've been riding all my life, and I was out there, I was enjoying, I was totally not connected with the horse, I was just in the moment. Oh my God, I ate it bad. I was in a body brace for like 6 months. So yeah.
Oh no. I'm still kind of limping on one foot, but that's not stopping me from riding. Of course we fall off and we still ride.
Get back on. So I think that's super important. The focus, sometimes you're in something where you can't be multitasking. You really have to be focused 100%. And that's probably like when you're having your first conversations with a client or something, right? You can't be thinking about the future. You have to be listening and focused.
Right.
Absolutely. Because I love the answer to both the questions. And you mentioned something that just reminded me. I had a friend who, you meet these people in life that their souls are a little older than their age. And, he always told me, you can only make two mistakes in life. There's a mistake by omission and there's a mistake by commission. And he always says, like, I'd rather live in a life where I make mistakes by commission, because at least I did something, than by avoiding something and then, there's a mistake. So I thought that was really, really insightful, and and I think that's a good kind of North Star to follow when people get concerned about getting the nose. You got to revel in the process in order to get to the finish line.
Yes. Again, I'm big on opportunity loss. So if I didn't make the call or I didn't, reach out, it's always a no. But I don't know that it's not a yes if I don't call again.
Absolutely.
Right. Like Gretzky used to say, you're never gonna, you don't make 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Or something
100%.
along those lines. I probably botched that up, but it was something along that.
You were close enough. You were close enough.
So I really want to thank you for joining us. I'm so happy you said yes. Again, I had to ask.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm glad you said yes. Before we leave, is there anything that I didn't ask or we didn't ask, or something that you wanted to share, or something you wish we'd asked for people who are interested in tenant rep, doing business in Knoxville, anything?
I would say that if there's someone that's trying to find their niche in real estate, I worked for a C&W office, Cushman & Wakefield office in Central Virginia. And I feel like that was really beneficial for how I crafted my business going forward, because there were so many brokers in the office that when I was starting, I don't think that I would have kept this same path if I had worked with a boutique office or in a boutique office and I was only, in contact with one or two other brokers. But because I was at a Cushman office and there were initially like 30 brokers and then there were 50 brokers, I learned what I wanted to take from a bunch of different people. I liked, doing business like this person for this component of the deal. And I liked the way this person cold called and the way this person toured space. And, if you're trying to find your niche and what works for you, being around as many people as possible that are already in the business, that are going to pull you into deals, learn what side of the business you like. I did a couple office deals and industrial deals initially, and I just felt like, okay, this really isn't exciting because they all feel the same to me. The deal itself might change, the deal parameters, but I was still touring the same kind of space, where I felt like when I was doing these retail deals, I was working on ground leases and pre-development leasing and, looking further out at locations 5-10 years down the road, instead of, a now deal where I feel like the office and industrial really hits home. So if I can say, if anyone's thinking about tenant rep, I would say find an office that has a bunch of brokers, and trying to, follow them, get on some of their deals if you can, to walk through the deal process, or intern with them, be their assistant, and find out what works for you. Because if you don't, build your business and operate your business, that's going to be conducive to the way that you are personally, it's just not going to be as fun. And you want to enjoy this career. I mean, I'm in it for 20 years and I love what I do. So
agreed.
Fantastic. Lindsey, it's been wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you.
It really has been an honor. And on behalf of Jennifer and I, thank you everybody for listening to another episode, this very special episode of Between Two Chairs. And now for Lindsey, for Jennifer and myself, we bid you
goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.